Welcome, fellow Tarnished, to a journey through time itself. Tonight we explore one of the most ancient and magnificent aspects of the lands between, the complete history of dragons. From the primordial age when stone-scaled titans ruled the skies to the flesh and blood descendants that soar through our current era, dragons represent not merely powerful adversaries, but the living memory of a world in constant transformation. The story of dragons in Elden Ring is not simply one of mighty beasts to be conquered. It is a tale of civilizations rising and falling, of friendships forged between sworn enemies, of corruption and transformation, and of power that comes at a price too terrible for most to comprehend. These creatures have witnessed the birth and death of gods, the rise and fall of empires, and the endless cycle of destruction and rebirth that defines the lands between. What makes the dragons of Elden Ring particularly fascinating is their evolution across vast stretches of time. They are not static monsters, but dynamic beings who have adapted, changed, and survived through multiple cosmic upheavals. Some have maintained their ancient forms and power, waiting in realms beyond time for gods who will never return. Others have evolved, incorporating human magic into their very beings or forming unlikely alliances with the children of the Erdtree. Still others have fallen, their noble pursuits of power transforming them into crawling mockeries of what they once aspired to become. Before we spread our wings and take flight into this comprehensive exploration, understand that the world of Elden Ring is vast and filled with mysteries that scholars and lore enthusiasts continue to unravel. Every item description, every environmental detail, every piece of dialogue adds another layer to this incredibly rich narrative. What we discover together represents countless hours of exploration and analysis by the community, pieced together from fragments scattered throughout the game world. So settle in, get comfortable, and prepare to soar through the ages. We're about to explore everything from the era when dragons ruled supreme to the tragic transformations of those who dared to consume their hearts. From epic battles that shaped history to quiet moments of unlikely friendship between human and beast. This is the complete lore of Elden Ring dragons, and it begins long before the Erdtree ever cast its golden shadow across the land. Long before the Erdtree cast its golden shadow across the lands between, before Queen Marika ascended to godhood, and even before the very concept of the Golden Order existed, the world belonged to a different kind of ruler entirely. This was the age of the ancient dragons, the primordial era, when stone-scaled titans commanded lightning itself and ruled over a vastly different world than the one we know. The ancient dragons were not merely large reptiles with wings. They were living embodiments of permanence and power, their bodies composed of gravelstone that seemed to twist the very fabric of time itself. These magnificent beings possessed 4 legs and 4 wings, particularly inlaid with gold, distinguishing them from their lesser descendants. Their bodies were made of light grey stone imbued with primordial gold, and when they died, their corpses would lose their tinge of gold, their remains breaking apart and returning to simple rocks. The ancient dragon smithing stones and somber ancient dragon smithing stones are said to be the scales of the Dragon Lord. Due to their unique ability to twist time, weapons upgraded with these smithing stones are capable of harming and slaying gods. This detail reveals something profound about the nature of these ancient beings. They existed partially outside the normal flow of time. Their very essence was capable of transcending the limitations that bound other creatures, making them beings of almost incomprehensible power. At the pinnacle of this draconic civilization stood Dragon Lord Placidusax, a being of such immense power and authority that he held the title of Elden Lord itself. But this was not the Elden Ring as we know it from Marika's age. This was something older, something connected to a different god entirely. The Dragon Lord, whose seat lies at the heart of the storm beyond time, is said to have been Elden Lord in the age before the tree. Once his god was fled, the Lord continued to await its return. The phrase, before the tree, is crucial here. This places the Age of Dragons not just before Marika's reign, but before the entire concept of the Golden Order as we understand it. The dragons ruled under an entirely different cosmic framework, serving a god whose identity remains one of the great mysteries of Elden Ring lore. What we do know is that this god was powerful enough to grant dominion over the lands between to beings as mighty as the ancient dragons. though the reasons for its eventual departure remain unclear. Azula served as the royal capital of dragon civilization, a floating city in the sky that defied conventional understanding of architecture and physics. This wasn't merely a fortress or palace, but an entire civilization suspended in the clouds, protected by storms and time distortions that kept it separate from the rest of the world. The crumbling ruins we can visit in the game represent only a fraction of what this magnificent city must have been in its glory days. The ancient dragons weren't alone in their rule. They commanded the loyalty of the beastmen, intelligent creatures who served not as slaves but as devoted priests and servants. In the catacombs beneath the city, many statues can be found depicting ancient dragons surrounded by beastmen, dressed like clergymen, highlighting their role as priests and servants of the dragons. This relationship speaks to a more complex society than simple domination. The beastmen were granted intelligence and formed their own civilization under draconic rule, creating a symbiotic relationship between the species. The ancient dragons who ruled in the prehistoric era before the tree would protect their lord as a wall of living rock. And so it is that the shape of the dragon has become symbolic of all manner of protections. This protection wasn't just physical, it was metaphysical, temporal, and spiritual. The ancient dragons served as guardians of cosmic order itself, maintaining the balance of their world through their very existence. Perhaps the most defining characteristic of the ancient dragons was their mastery over red lightning. Spoken of in legend, red lightning is the weapon wielded by the ancient dragons. This wasn't ordinary electrical discharge, but a primal force that represented the dragon's connection to the fundamental powers of creation and destruction. Each ancient dragon manifested this lightning differently, creating unique weapons and techniques that would later influence human magic for millennia. The society of ancient dragons was hierarchical but not tyrannical. Above them all was Placidusax, a dragon who ruled as Elden Lord from the royal city of Azula. Originally, Placidusax possessed multiple heads. The Old Lord's talisman suggests that Placidusax had at least 2 more heads that had been removed by the time the Tarnished reaches him. This multi-headed form may have represented his supreme authority among dragonkind, marking him as a being apart even from other ancient dragons. The ancient dragons created a world of stability and order, where their stone forms provided an anchor point for reality itself. Based on their stone-scaled nature and the description of their rule lasting through prehistoric eras, we can assume they possessed lifespans that transcended human understanding of mortality. Their civilization appears to have been built on principles of permanence and protection, with each dragon serving as both individual and part of a greater whole that maintained cosmic balance. This golden age of draconic rule represents a fundamentally different approach to governance than what would come later, where human civilizations would rise and fall with the whims of mortals and the passing of generations. The ancient dragons provided consistent, unchanging leadership. Their stone forms were immune to the ravages of time. Their lightning commanded respect without question, and their connection to their god provided divine mandate for their rule. But even the mightiest civilizations are not immune to change. The age of the ancient dragons would not last forever. The seeds of their downfall were sown not by external conquest but by betrayal from within, and by the mysterious departure of the very god who had granted them their authority in the first place. The stability that had defined their civilization for eons would be shattered by events that would reshape the nature of dragonkind forever. Among all the stories of treachery and conflict that fill the history of the lands between, few are as visceral and personally devastating as the tale of Bayle the Dread. This is not just a story of political coup or territorial dispute. This is a tale of intimate betrayal, of trust shattered by ambition, and of a conflict so brutal that it would reshape the very nature of dragonkind forever. Bayle the Dread was a legendary black dragon who is said to be the ancestor of the drakes, the lesser dragons we encounter throughout our journey. But before he became the dreaded enemy of all ancient dragons, Bayle was one of them, a member of the inner circle, close enough to Dragon Lord Placidusax to know his weaknesses, trusted enough to have access to the very heart of draconic power. This makes his betrayal all the more shocking and personal. At some point during his timeless rule, Placidusax was betrayed by one of his own Bayle the Dread. Bayle inflicted a grievous wound upon the Dragon Lord before fleeing, eventually coming to reside in the realm of shadow. The word betrayed here is crucial. This wasn't a challenge issued by a rival from another faction or territory. This was treachery from within the very heart of the draconic hierarchy. What drove Bayle to this act of ultimate betrayal? The lore tells us that Bayle had attempted to usurp Placidusax's title as the Dragon Lord, leading to a deadly battle between the two. The ambition to rule is common enough, but for an ancient dragon to turn against their own kind suggests deeper motivations were at work. Perhaps Bayle saw weakness in Placidusax's rule, or disagreed fundamentally with the direction of draconic civilization. Maybe he had his own vision of what dragonkind could become, one that didn't require subservience to the mysterious god that Placidusax served. The battle between Placidusax and Bayle was not a simple confrontation. It was a cataclysmic event that scarred both combatants for eternity. Two of Placidusax's lost heads can be found still clinging onto the underside of Bayle's neck, their jaws locked in an eternal bite. The ancient dragons who sided with Bayle against Placidusax wielded the branching red lightning, a variation of the traditional ancient dragon lightning that would mark them as rebels. This detail reveals the horrific nature of their conflict. Placidusax's very heads still bite into Bayle's flesh, a permanent reminder of their mutual destruction. Neither combatant truly won this battle, both were left maimed and forever changed. The physical evidence of their struggle, preserved across eons, speaks to the cosmic significance of their confrontation. This wasn't merely two powerful beings fighting for dominance. This was a rupture in the fundamental order of draconic society. The fact that some ancient dragons sided with Bayle adds another layer of complexity to this tale. This wasn't simply a personal dispute between two powerful beings. It was a civil war that split draconic civilization down the middle. Some dragons chose to follow the rebel Bayle, perhaps convinced by his vision of a different future, or perhaps simply seeking to back what they saw as the winning side. The ancient dragons who sided with Bayle against Placidusax wielded the branching red lightning, marking them as distinct from the loyalist faction. While Bayle was able to grievously injure Placidusax, Bayle was in turn greatly beaten. Ultimately, he was forced to flee away with the rest of his drakes into the Land of Shadow. The Land of Shadow, what we now know as the Realm of Shadow explored in the DLC, became Bayle's prison and kingdom both. Cut off from the main lands between, Bayle and his followers would develop into something new and terrible, separate from the ancient dragons they had once been. Bayle was the foul dragon's name, a terrible harbinger of destruction whose challenge to the ancient Dragon Lord ended in grievous mutual injury. The mutual nature of their injuries is emphasized repeatedly in the lore, suggesting that this was not a battle where one side emerged victorious. Instead, both Placidusax and Bayle were left forever scarred, forever diminished from what they once were. The physical description of Bayle when we encounter him in the DLC tells the story of this ancient battle with brutal clarity. Bayle is a massive black and red dragon with red eyes and 3 curved horns angled downward. His appearance is heavily scarred and damaged from his battle with Placidusax. His wings have been heavily torn and shredded with the bones protruding out of his skin. His left leg has been ripped off entirely, and the remaining heads of Placidusax appear to have been bitten deep into his bony back, still locked in their death grip after all this time. But Bayle possessed something that Placidusax did not, the ability to regenerate, at least partially. Unlike Placidusax, Bayle seems to be able to regenerate his missing limbs. During his second phase, he manages to restore 2 of his wings that he had lost during his mortal fight against his nemesis. This regenerative ability might be connected to his horned nature, seeing as he has supernumerary horns on his head and heart, features associated with the Crucible. It's possible that Bayle is a dragon equivalent to an omen. The Crucible connection is particularly interesting, as it suggests that Bayle might have been influenced by or connected to primordial forces that were older or different from those that governed the other ancient dragons. The presence of supernumerary extra horns beyond the normal draconic structure bears similarity to the Omen, who are themselves marked by the Crucible's chaotic influence. If Bayle was indeed connected to these primordial forces, this could help explain both his power and his willingness to rebel against established order. The aftermath of this battle would have consequences that stretched far beyond the personal animosity between these two titans. Placidusax, unable to pursue his enemy due to his grievous wounds, had his servants direct the humans to hunt Bayle and his drake brood, laying the foundations of dragon communion. Unable to complete his revenge personally, Placidusax would turn to mortal agents to continue the war against Bayle and his descendants. This decision to involve humans in what was essentially a draconic civil war would have profound implications for the future of both species. It would lead to the creation of dragon communion, a practice that would grant humans draconic power at a terrible cost. It would also establish a pattern of dragons using human proxies to fight their battles, a relationship that would continue throughout the ages. As vengeance for Bayle's transgression, Placidusax had some of his followers take mortal forms as humanoid priestesses and travel to the lands of men, where they would beckon human warriors to their cause. They established the practice of dragon communion in order to hunt down and punish Bayle and his descendants, the Drakes. The transformation of ancient dragons into human form to serve as priestesses represents a desperate measure. These immortal beings of stone and lightning reduce themselves to flesh and blood in order to walk among humans and recruit them for their cause. The sacrifice this represented cannot be understated. These dragons gave up their immortal forms and much of their power to serve their wounded lord's quest for vengeance. They abandoned the safety of Adula and the company of their own kind to live among mortals, teaching them techniques that would allow humans to consume the very essence of dragonkind. It was an act of ultimate loyalty, but also one that would have unforeseen consequences that would echo through the ages. Bayle's betrayal didn't just wound Placidusax. It created an entirely new branch of dragon evolution. Bayle the Dread was a legendary black dragon who is said to be the ancestor of the Drakes, the lesser dragons we encounter throughout the game. His rebellion created a fundamental split in dragonkind, with the Drakes that descended from Bayle being fundamentally different from their ancient dragon ancestors. They possessed only 2 legs where their forebears had 4. Their wings served as forelimbs rather than separate appendages, and they had flesh where the ancients had stone. The name, Bayle itself, carries significance. It is a corruption of Bayle, which refers to a destructive and evil force. Whether this name was given to him after his betrayal or was prophetic of his nature from the beginning, it perfectly captures the role he would play in draconic history, a force of destruction that would forever change what it meant to be a dragon. The story of Bayle's betrayal serves as more than just historical context. It's a foundational myth that explains the origin of many of the conflicts and characteristics we see in the dragons of the current era. It shows us that even among beings as ancient and powerful as the dragons, personal ambition and ideological differences could tear apart civilizations that had endured for eons. Most importantly, it demonstrates that the fall of the Age of Dragons was not simply due to the rise of human civilization or the arrival of new gods. It was hastened by the dragons' own actions, by civil war and betrayal that weakened them from within and made them vulnerable to external threats. The greatest enemies of dragonkind were not humans or gods, but other dragons who refused to accept the established order. The departure of the ancient dragon's god represents one of the most mysterious and pivotal moments in the prehistory of the lands between. This event was so significant that it not only ended the Age of Dragons, but created a temporal anomaly that continues to affect the world to this very day. The story of this divine abandonment and its aftermath reveals the tragic loyalty of Dragon Lord Placidusax and explains one of the most haunting locations in all of Elden Ring. The Dragon Lord, whose seat lies at the heart of the storm beyond time, is said to have been Elden Lord in the age before the tree. Once his god was fled, the Lord continued to await its return. The phrasing here is crucial. The god was fled rather than simply left or departed. This suggests that the deity didn't choose to abandon the dragons. Rather, it was forced to flee from some threat or circumstance that was powerful enough to drive away a being capable of granting dominion over the entire lands between. We know from the endings associated with Ranni and the frenzied flame that an Empyrean can become god by usurping the throne of the one who came before them. This allows them to use the Elden Ring to reshape the world as they wish. This information provides context for what might have driven the ancient dragon's god to flee. Based on what we know of cosmic succession in the lands between, it's possible that the greater will, the outer god, that would later empower Marika, was already beginning its campaign to claim the lands between. The arrival of this new cosmic force could have left the dragon's god with no choice but to retreat. The identity of this fled god remains one of Elden Ring's greatest mysteries. We know it was powerful enough to maintain the Age of Dragons, to grant Placidusax the title of Elden Lord, and to sustain a civilization of immortal stone beings for what must have been eons. Yet when faced with whatever threat emerged, this god chose flight over fight, abandoning its most loyal servants to face an uncertain future alone. When Placidusax's god fled, the Dragon Lord resolved to await its return, withdrawing to his seat at the heart of the storm beyond time. This decision reveals something profound about Placidusax's character. Despite being grievously wounded by Bayle's betrayal, despite seeing his civilization crumble around him, despite having every reason to rage or despair, the Dragon Lord chose loyalty. He chose to wait, but this wasn't passive waiting. Placidusax didn't simply curl up in a corner of Farum Azula and hope for the best. Instead, he created something unprecedented, a storm beyond time itself. It is said that the ancient royal city of Farum Azula has been slowly crumbling since time immemorial. The crumbling of Farum Azula isn't due to neglect or decay in the conventional sense. It's the result of existing partially outside the normal flow of time, slowly degrading as it exists in multiple temporal states simultaneously. The storm beyond time represents one of the most complex magical workings in all of Elden Ring lore. Placidusax didn't just hide from the world. He removed himself and his seat of power from the normal progression of time itself. This temporal displacement serves multiple purposes. It preserves him from the aging and decay that would affect even an ancient dragon over thousands of years. It keeps him and Farum Azula separate from whatever cosmic forces drove his god away, and it creates a beacon that his god could theoretically use to find him when it's ready to return. The position that Placidusax is in, with his two remaining heads looking towards the sky, is similar to how the two fingers commune with the greater will. He may be attempting to reach and contact his god who apparently fled the lands between. Even in his self-imposed exile beyond time, Placidusax continues his vigil, constantly attempting to re-establish contact with the deity he serves. His posture mirrors that of the two fingers, suggesting that he's engaging in a similar form of cosmic communication, reaching across the void between worlds to find his missing god. It should also be noted that unlike the two fingers, Placidusax's heads are crossed, reminiscent of someone crossing their fingers. This detail adds a poignant element to the ancient Dragon Lord's vigil. The crossed heads might represent hope, luck, or even a kind of prayer, the gesture of a being so desperate for his god's return that he maintains this position across millennia, never giving up faith, despite the passage of countless ages. The creation of the storm beyond time had profound consequences for the remaining ancient dragons and beastmen. Farum Azula became a mausoleum enshrining Placidusax, guarded by chosen beastmen. The floating city transformed from a capital of a thriving civilization into a tomb-like monument to what once was. The beastmen who remained didn't abandon their posts, but instead became eternal guardians, protecting their wounded lord as he maintained his vigil. Many of these ancient four-winged dragons can be seen flying around the crumbling Farum Azula. Not all ancient dragons fled when their god departed. Some remained loyal to Placidusax, choosing to share his exile in the storm beyond time rather than face the uncertain world that emerged in the wake of their civilization's collapse. These dragons exist in a state of temporal suspension, neither fully alive nor dead, waiting alongside their lord for a return that may never come. In Farum Azula, many ancient dragons can be found buried in the rock between the catacombs of the beastmen and the surface of the city, their bodies still filled with gold. Some of these loyal dragons didn't survive the transition to existing beyond time. Their bodies, still retaining the golden essence of their divine connection, became part of the city's structure itself. They gave their very existence to maintain the temporal barrier that keeps Farum Azula separate from the rest of reality. The storm beyond time serves as more than just a hiding place. It's a statement of faith so profound that it defies conventional understanding. Placidusax could have used his remaining power to try to rebuild dragon civilization, to seek revenge against those who wronged him, or to find some other purpose in the post-God world. Instead, he chose to essentially remove himself from history itself, betting everything on the eventual return of the deity who abandoned him. Despite his stasis, Placidusax continued to grant blessings to his followers. Even in his self-imposed exile, the Dragon Lord didn't abandon his remaining subjects entirely. His power continued to flow to those who served him, suggesting that his connection to divine authority persisted even without the physical presence of his god. This raises questions about the nature of divine power. Perhaps the Elden Ring and the authority it grants can exist independently of the god who originally wielded it. The tragedy of Placidusax's vigil becomes even more poignant when we consider that his god's flight was likely the first step in the cosmic reshuffling that would eventually bring the greater will and Marika to power. The departure of the dragon god created a power vacuum that would be filled by the Golden Order, which would in turn lead to the war between dragons and humans that would finish what Bayle's betrayal had started. In creating the storm beyond time, Placidusax inadvertently removed himself and his most loyal followers from the events that would shape the future of the lands between. While he waited in temporal isolation, the world moved on without him. The Golden Order rose, Marika ascended to godhood, and the age of human dominion began. By the time the Tarnished discovers Placidusax in his temporal refuge, the world he once ruled is so changed that it might as well be an entirely different realm. Yet still he waits, heads crossed in hopeful prayer, maintaining his vigil across eons. The storm beyond time stands as perhaps the most powerful testament to loyalty in all of Elden Ring, a devotion so absolute that it transcends time itself, kept alive by faith alone in the face of seemingly impossible odds. Whether this loyalty is noble or tragic, wise or foolish, is a question each of us must answer for ourselves, but there can be no doubt that it represents one of the most profound expressions of devotion in all of fiction. The transition from the Age of Dragons to the Age of the Tree was not a peaceful changing of the guard. It was marked by violence, tragedy, and events that would echo through history long after the last dragon fell. The pivotal moment that transformed simmering tensions into open warfare was the assault of ancient dragon Grand Sax upon Leyndell, an attack so devastating and unprecedented that it would forever change the relationship between dragons and humans. Ancient dragon Grand Sax wrought havoc on Leyndell, the royal capital, the only time in recorded history that Leyndell's walls have fallen. This marked the dawn of the war against dragons. The significance of this event cannot be overstated. Leyndell, the great capital of the emerging Golden Order, was considered impregnable. Its walls had never been breached. Its defenses had never been overcome. The city stood as a symbol of human achievement and divine protection under Marika's rule. For a single dragon to not only breach these defenses, but to wreak havoc within the city itself, represented a catastrophic failure of security and a devastating blow to the Golden Order's reputation. A great ancient dragon, Grand Sax, once rained calamity upon the royal capital, the only time in historical record that Leyndell's walls have fallen. This marked the dawn of the war against dragons. The description of Grand Sax's attack as bringing calamity, rather than simply destruction, suggests something more than mere physical damage. This was an apocalyptic event that shook the very foundations of the emerging Golden Order. The word calamity implies disaster on a cosmic scale, something that threatened not just buildings and people, but the entire structure of civilization itself. What drove Grand Sax to launch this unprecedented assault? The lore doesn't give us explicit motivations, but we can piece together a likely scenario from the context of the times. The Golden Order was rising, claiming dominion over lands that may have once belonged to dragons. Marika was consolidating power under a new god, the Greater Will, whose authority would have directly challenged the legitimacy of any remaining dragon claims to rulership. From this perspective, Grand Sax's attack might have been a desperate attempt to demonstrate draconic power before it was too late. The choice to attack Leyndell specifically was strategically brilliant. As the capital of the Golden Order, it represented the heart of human power. If Grand Sax could demonstrate that even this most protected city was vulnerable to dragon might, he could potentially shatter human confidence and force a reckoning. Alternatively, the attack might have been a statement, a reminder that dragons were not simply going to fade quietly into history. The red lightning bolt he summons is reminiscent of the bolt of Grand Sax, used by the massive ancient dragon inside the royal capital. The connection between Grand Sax's lightning and the red lightning wielded by ancient dragons suggests that Grand Sax was no ordinary dragon. He was likely one of the most powerful members of his species, which would explain how a single dragon could accomplish such devastation. The attack succeeded beyond what anyone could have imagined. Spear whittled from the weapon wielded by Grand Sax, one of the legendary armaments. A great ancient dragon, Grand Sax, once rained calamity upon the royal capital, the only time in historical record that Leyndell's walls have fallen. The fact that Grand Sax's weapon became a legendary armament speaks to the lasting impact of his assault. His lightning spear was so powerful and memorable that it became the template for weapons crafted long after his death. But Grand Sax's attack had consequences far beyond the immediate destruction he caused. During the age of the Erdtree, the ancient dragons warred against the forces of Leyndell after an assault on the royal capital by the great ancient dragon Grand Sax. His solo attack triggered a much larger conflict, drawing the remaining ancient dragons into open warfare with the Golden Order. What might have started as one dragon's desperate gambit became a full-scale war between two civilizations. The psychological impact of Grand Sax's assault cannot be underestimated. After the great ancient dragon attacked, the Sentinels had an epiphany. The only way to truly protect the tree was to become dragons themselves. The Tree Sentinels, the elite guardians of the Erdtree, were so shaken by their inability to prevent the assault that they fundamentally reconsidered their entire approach to defense. Their epiphany led them to adopt dragon-themed armor and weapons, essentially admitting that conventional human military might was insufficient to deal with the dragon threat. This represents a profound shift in human military thinking. Before Grand Sax's attack, the humans likely believed that their divine backing from the greater will and their conventional weapons and tactics would be sufficient to maintain order. The ease with which a single dragon breached their most formidable defenses forced them to acknowledge that they were dealing with threats beyond their normal understanding of warfare. The assault also revealed the true scale of the challenge facing the Golden Order. Dragons weren't just large animals to be hunted or driven off. They were intelligent, strategic opponents capable of planning and executing sophisticated military operations. Grand Sax's attack demonstrated military intelligence in recognizing Leyndell as the key target, tactical planning in understanding how to breach the city's defenses, and strategic thinking in recognizing that a successful assault could destabilize the entire Golden Order. Ironically, this dragon is much larger than Placidusax himself, taking up a large portion of the dungeon. The physical remains of Grand Sax that we can see in Leyndell are massive, even by ancient dragon standards larger than the Dragon Lord himself. This size difference might explain how Grand Sax was able to accomplish what he did. His sheer physical presence would have been overwhelming, his lightning attacks devastating on a scale that human defenses simply weren't designed to handle. The fact that Grand Sax's remains are still embedded within Leyndell speaks to both the scale of his attack and the lasting impact it had on the city. Rather than removing the dragon's corpse, the humans seem to have built around it, incorporating the remains into the city's structure. This decision might have been practical. The remains were simply too massive to move, or it might have served as a permanent reminder of their vulnerability, or perhaps even as a trophy of their eventual victory. The positioning of Grand Sax's remains also tells a story. The dragon's body is integrated into the city's architecture in a way that suggests he fought his way deep into Leyndell before finally being brought down. This wasn't a case of the dragon being stopped at the walls. He penetrated into the heart of the capital, though how far and for how long remains unclear from the evidence we can see. Grand Sax's assault marked the end of any possibility of peaceful coexistence between the ancient dragons and the Golden Order. Before his attack, there might have been some hope for negotiation, for finding some way for both civilizations to exist in the same world. His decision to bring war directly to the human capital made such accommodations far more difficult, if not impossible. The lines were drawn, and both sides understood that conflict was now inevitable. The war that followed would cost both sides dearly, but it would also produce moments of unexpected beauty and profound transformation. The enmity that began with Grand Sax's assault would eventually give way to the friendship between Godwyn and Fortissax, demonstrating that even the most bitter conflicts can sometimes lead to understanding and peace. But that peace would only come after much blood had been spilled and many lives had been lost on both sides of this terrible conflict. In the annals of Elden Ring's history, few events are as remarkable or as transformative as the friendship that blossomed between Godwyn the Golden and ancient dragon Fortissax. This relationship represents more than just a personal bond between two powerful beings. It symbolizes the possibility of reconciliation between entire species, the transformation of hatred into understanding, and the birth of new forms of worship that would influence the lands between for generations to come. Long ago, Godwyn the Golden defeated the ancient dragon Fortissax and befriended his fallen foe, an event that gave rise to the ancient dragon cult in the capital. The simplicity of this statement belies the complexity of what actually transpired. The encounter between Godwyn and Fortissax was the culmination of the war that had begun with Grand Sax's assault on Leyndell. After years of conflict, after countless battles and mounting casualties on both sides, the fate of both civilizations came down to a single combat between their greatest champions. Ancient dragon Fortissax, also known as the Lick Dragon and the mightiest Boulderstone, is the sibling of Lancerx and took part in the war between the ancient dragons and Leyndell. Fortissax wielded red lightning and was defeated by Godwyn the Golden on what appears to have been a final decisive battlefield of the conflict. The title, Mightiest Boulderstone, speaks to Fortissax's reputation among his own kind. This wasn't just any ancient dragon that Godwyn faced. This was one of their most powerful champions, a being whose mastery of red lightning and whose stone-scaled hide had made him a formidable opponent. The duel between Godwyn and Fortissax must have been a sight to behold. On one side stood the Golden Knight, blessed with divine power from the greater will, wielding weapons and techniques that had proven effective in the war. On the other side stood an ancient being of living stone and lightning, whose kind had ruled the lands between since before human civilization existed, armed with the red lightning mastery that defined ancient dragonkind. Fortissax was challenged by Godwyn the Golden, who fought to the last. Godwyn defeated Fortissax, but he befriended his fallen foe, and their bond gave rise to the ancient dragon cult of the royal capital. The phrase, fought to the last, suggests that this wasn't a one-sided battle. Both combatants pushed themselves to their absolute limits, with Godwyn only emerging victorious after an epic struggle that tested every aspect of his skill and determination. What makes this encounter extraordinary isn't the victory itself, it's what happened afterward. In most tales of conquest, the victor would have either killed their defeated enemy or taken them as a slave or prisoner. Instead, Godwyn made a choice that defied convention and expectation. He offered friendship to the being he had just defeated in single combat. The decision to befriend Fortissax rather than finish him off speaks volumes about Godwyn's character. Here was a demigod at the height of his power, fresh from victory over one of the most dangerous enemies his people had ever faced. And instead of claiming the spoils of war, he chose compassion. This wasn't weakness. It was a form of strength that transcended mere martial prowess. But friendship couldn't be one-sided. For this relationship to work, Fortissax had to make his own choice to accept Godwyn's offer. For an ancient dragon, a being whose entire species had been at war with humanity, this represented a profound transformation of perspective. Fortissax had to set aside not just personal enmity but racial prejudice, cultural conditioning, and the weight of history itself. Through this friendship, Godwyn gained the ability to wield golden lightning, while the dragons gained acceptance as part of the Golden Order. This wasn't merely a personal exchange of gifts between friends. It was a transformation of the fundamental nature of both beings, and by extension, both their peoples. Godwyn's acquisition of golden lightning represented more than just new magical abilities. It was a synthesis of human divine power and ancient draconic mastery that created something entirely new. It is said that this golden lightning was wielded by Godwyn, who befriended Fortissax. This golden hue represented the fusion of draconic power with the divine authority of the greater will, creating a form of lightning that belonged fully to neither tradition, but instead represented their unity. The fact that Godwyn's lightning was specifically golden rather than the traditional red of the ancient dragons is significant. It showed that something new had been created, not simply borrowed. Meanwhile, the dragons' acceptance into the Golden Order was revolutionary. These ancient beings who had once ruled as absolute monarchs agreed to become part of a new cosmic order under a different god. This wasn't simply surrender, it was adaptation, a recognition that the world had changed and that survival required evolution rather than stubborn adherence to the past. The ancient dragon cult that arose from this friendship represents one of the most successful religious syntheses in Elden Ring's history. The worship of the ancient dragons does not conflict with belief in the tree. After all, this seal and lightning itself are both imbued with gold. The cult found a way to honor both the ancient power of the dragons and the new authority of the Golden Order, creating a religious framework that satisfied adherents of both traditions. One of the incantations of the capital's ancient dragon cult summon a lightning spear and hurl it before the caster. Charging causes a lightning bolt to strike the point of impact. This integration wasn't merely political, it was theological and magical. The ancient dragon cult developed its own unique set of incantations that drew from both human faith magic and draconic lightning mastery, creating spells that neither tradition could have developed in isolation. Ancient dragon Lanciax is the sibling of Fortissax and took part in the war between the ancient dragons and Leyndell. Lanciax wielded red lightning and after the war's conclusion took the form of a human to teach knights incantations as a member of the ancient dragon cult. Fortissax's sister, Lanciax, also embraced this new synthesis, going so far as to take human form to serve as a priestess and teacher. Her willingness to abandon her natural dragon form to walk among humans as an educator demonstrates the depth of commitment the dragons made to this new alliance. Of all the knights, Vike the Dragonspear was the one Lanciax loved the most. Lanciax's relationship with Vike adds another personal dimension to the dragon-human synthesis. This wasn't just political alliance or religious accommodation. There were genuine emotional bonds forming between individual dragons and humans, relationships that transcended species barriers entirely. The success of the ancient dragon cult had implications far beyond the immediate participants. It demonstrated that the seemingly irreconcilable differences between the old order and the new could be bridged through understanding and mutual respect. It showed that power didn't have to be zero-sum, that the rise of the Golden Order didn't have to mean the complete destruction of everything that came before. The friendship between Godwyn and Fortissax also had profound personal consequences for both beings. For Godwyn, it represented perhaps the greatest achievement of his life, not just the military victory over a powerful enemy, but the transformation of that enemy into a loyal friend. This relationship would define much of his identity and would continue to shape his story even after his death. For Fortissax, the friendship provided purpose in a world where his people's traditional role had been eliminated. Rather than clinging to a past that could never be restored, he found a new way to serve and protect, channeling his ancient power in service of a new order while maintaining his essential identity as an ancient dragon. The tragedy that would later befall both friends makes their initial bond even more poignant. When Godwyn was assassinated on the Night of Black Knives, Fortissax would struggle desperately to save his friend from the corruption of death, ultimately becoming corrupted himself in the process. But this future tragedy doesn't diminish the beauty of what they achieved together. It actually enhances it, showing that their bond was strong enough to transcend even death itself. The friendship between Godwyn and Fortissax stands as one of the most hopeful episodes in all of Elden Ring's lore. In a world defined by conflict, betrayal, and the grinding of cosmic forces against one another, their relationship demonstrates that understanding and compassion can triumph over hatred and fear. that ancient enemies can become the closest of friends, and that the most lasting victories are won not through conquest but through connection. In the complex web of power, revenge, and transformation that defines Elden Ring's lore, few practices are as simultaneously alluring and terrifying as Dragon Communion. This ancient ritual, born from the desire for vengeance against Bayle the Dread, evolved into something far more complex and dangerous than its creators ever intended. The story of Dragon Communion reveals how the pursuit of power can lead to profound transformation and how the line between hunter and prey can become horrifyingly blurred. Dragon Communion began as a practice, developed as a retaliatory effort by Dragon Lord Placidusax against Bayle the Dread and his brood in an age long past. Bayle had attacked Placidusax, and after the two sustained serious injuries, Bayle fled to the jagged peak, unable to pursue his enemy due to his own grievous wounds. Placidusax devised a different form of revenge. He would turn mortals into weapons against Bayle and his descendants. As vengeance for Bayle's transgression, Placidusax had some of his followers take mortal forms as humanoid priestesses and travel to the lands of men, where they would beckon human warriors to their cause. They established the practice of Dragon Communion in order to hunt down and punish Bayle and his descendants, the Drakes. This origin story reveals the calculating nature of Placidusax's revenge. Rather than simply ordering attacks against Bayle's followers, he created a self-sustaining system that would continue the war across generations. The priestesses who established Dragon Communion made tremendous sacrifices for their lord's cause. Long ago, Fortissax assumed human form to share Dragon Communion with the world. Now she has acquired a human heart. These ancient dragons gave up their immortal stone forms, their immense power, and their natural advantages to walk among humans and teach them the ways of consuming dragon hearts. The phrase, acquired a human heart, suggests that this transformation wasn't merely physical but emotional and spiritual as well. Dragon Communion is the act of consuming dragon hearts in order to acquire the draconic powers within. The hearts are consumed at a Dragon Communion altar, which is usually in the presence of a fallen dragon. The ritual itself is deceptively simple: consume the heart, gain the power. But this simplicity masks the profound implications of what practitioners are actually doing. They're not just acquiring magical abilities. They're integrating the essence of an entirely different species into their own being. The hearts themselves are remarkable organs. Yet their vivacious red hearts were covered in sacred gravel stones. Even in modern dragons, the heart retained protection from the gravel stones that had once armored their ancient ancestors. This suggests that the heart contains the most essential aspects of draconic nature, the core elements that make a dragon what it is. When humans consume these hearts, they're not just gaining magical power. They're absorbing the fundamental essence of dragonkind. Those who partake in Dragon Communion will one day shed their humanity. The practice comes with a warning that most who begin the ritual choose to ignore. The transformation promised by Dragon Communion isn't just about gaining draconic abilities. It's about losing human nature entirely. This represents one of the most extreme transformations possible in the lands between, a change so fundamental that it affects not just the body but the very soul of the practitioner. Incantation of those who have hunted dragons and feasted upon their hearts. Theirs is a pure and overwhelming power. The power gained through Dragon Communion is described as both pure and overwhelming, suggesting that it represents access to fundamental forces rather than merely enhanced human capabilities. This purity comes at a cost. The more pure the draconic power becomes, the less human the practitioner remains. The psychological effects of Dragon Communion are as significant as the physical ones. Many practitioners develop a hunger for the hearts as they hunt, which gradually intensifies the more hearts they devour. This leads many to commune without restraint, an act that has dire consequences for their humanity as their bodies and minds gradually become more and more draconic. The practice creates its own momentum, with each consumed heart making the next one more appealing and more necessary. Those extraordinary individuals who perpetuate Dragon Communion are called the Dragon-Hearted. Despite the ultimate fate that awaits them, practitioners of Dragon Communion are recognized as extraordinary. The title Dragon-Hearted carries connotations of courage, determination, and exceptional capability. These aren't weak-willed individuals who stumble into transformation. They're heroes and warriors who deliberately choose power over humanity. The physical transformation process is gradual but inexorable. Those who have performed Dragon Communion will find their humanity slowly slipping away. Once they fully succumb to their fate, they are left no more than worms that crawl the earth. The end result of extensive Dragon Communion is transformation into magma worms, creatures that retain some draconic power but lose the ability to fly and much of their intelligence and autonomy. Curved greatsword wielded by magma worms. The shape resembles a dragon's jaw and is covered in hard scales. It's said these land-bound dragons were once human heroes who partook in Dragon Communion, a grave transgression for which they were cursed to crawl the earth upon their bellies, shadows of their former selves. The description of this transformation as a curse reveals the tragic nature of what these heroes thought they were choosing. Magma worms are quadrupedal draconic beings with torn vestigial wings and broad heads. They were once human heroes who partook in Dragon Communion, for which they were cursed to crawl the earth as flightless imitations of dragons, losing their humanity in the process. These creatures retain enough intelligence to wield weapons and exhibit tactical thinking, but they've lost the higher reasoning and emotional complexity that made them human. Great Worm Theodorix provides a specific example of this transformation. An ancient troll warrior and hero of the war against the giants who became a magma worm after partaking in Dragon Communion. Theodorix was a war hero, a being who had already proven his exceptional nature through his service in one of the great conflicts of the age. Yet even his heroic nature couldn't protect him from the ultimate consequences of Dragon Communion. The name of the ancient troll warrior Theodorix lives on as a hero of the war against the giants, even after his transformation into a magma worm. Theodorix retained enough of his heroic reputation that his name continued to be honored. This suggests that his transformation occurred after his heroic deeds were complete, possibly as a result of seeking power, to continue serving in conflicts, or to protect others from threats that conventional strength couldn't handle. Theodorix's case also reveals that Dragon Communion transformation isn't limited to humans. As a troll who became a magma worm, he demonstrates that the process affects the fundamental nature of consciousness and identity, rather than just human biology. Any intelligent being who consumes dragon hearts risks the same fate, regardless of their original species or inherent magical nature. Superior incantation of Dragon Communion channels the power of the Great Worm Theodorix, transforms caster into a great worm to spew a large volume of magma breath, allows one follow-up attack. The incantation that channels Theodorix's power reveals that even in their transformed state, magma worms retain enough of their original heroic nature to inspire others. The power that can be gained from consuming Theodorix's heart is described as superior, suggesting that heroic individuals don't simply lose their exceptional nature when transformed, they channel it into their new draconic abilities. Some drakes have become aware of this practice, such as Ekzykes the Decaying, who even after succumbing to Malenia's rot, would never forget his hatred, and thus keeps himself stationed at the entrance of the Cathedral of Dragon Communion, so that he may kill or deter any would-be practitioners before they can reach the altar. Ekzykes' guardianship of the cathedral represents the other side of the Dragon Communion equation. While humans see the practice as a way to gain power, dragons understandably view it as a form of cannibalism and violation. Ekzykes' position as guardian is particularly poignant, because he himself has been corrupted by the Scarlet Rot, yet he still chooses to protect other dragons from the fate of being consumed. His hatred for Dragon Communion practitioners is so strong that it survives even the mind-destroying effects of the rot, suggesting that the violation represented by heart consumption strikes at the very core of draconic identity. The Cathedral of Dragon Communion itself stands as a monument to the practice's institutionalization. Rather than being performed in secret or as isolated acts of desperation, Dragon Communion became formalized, complete with dedicated altars and rituals. This institutionalization made the practice more accessible to humans, but also more efficient at achieving Placidusax's original goal of creating dragon hunters. The irony of Dragon Communion's success is that it created a self-perpetuating cycle that extended far beyond Placidusax's original intent. As time passed, the practice would continue without influence from the priestesses. However, many practitioners would forget the original purpose of these hunts and would simply carry on consuming hearts in pursuit of personal gain. What began as a directed military campaign against Bayle became a general predation against all dragons. This evolution of purpose represents one of the unintended consequences of creating powerful but autonomous weapons. Placidusax gave humans the tools to hunt dragons, but couldn't control how those tools would ultimately be used. The Dragon Communion practitioners became a threat to all dragons, not just Bayle's descendants, as the practice proved too useful and too addictive for humans to abandon once its original purpose was achieved. Heart, consumed in the ancient, original form of Dragon Communion use, while disrobed to turn one's human flesh into an ancient dragon. The change cannot be undone except by death. Using this heart, while already transformed, temporarily boosts Dragon Communion incantations. The rock heart represents the most extreme form of Dragon Communion, offering complete transformation rather than just temporary power. This item reveals that the practice had multiple levels of intensity, with some practitioners choosing partial transformation, while others committed to complete metamorphosis. The requirement to be disrobed for this transformation adds a ritualistic element that emphasizes the vulnerability and commitment required. The practitioner must literally shed their human coverings, their symbols of civilization and culture, to embrace their new draconic nature. The fact that the change cannot be undone except by death emphasizes the finality of this choice. There is no going back, no middle ground, no safety net. Even after being consumed, the throbbing heart of Bayle continues to resist its subjugation, never weakening. One day, the fire within will consume the very body and soul of its communion devourer. The heart of Bayle represents the ultimate prize and ultimate danger of Dragon Communion. Even in death, Bayle's will remain so strong that consuming his heart doesn't grant power so much as it invites possession. The heart actively fights against the one who consumed it, promising that the tables will eventually turn. This resistance of Bayle's heart reveals something profound about the nature of Dragon Communion. The power gained isn't truly owned by the practitioner. It's borrowed, rented, held temporarily against the will of its original possessor. The stronger the dragon whose heart is consumed, the more actively that dragon's essence will work to reclaim control. The warning that one day the fire within will consume the very body and soul of its communion devourer suggests that consuming Bayle's heart is essentially a delayed death sentence. The practitioner gains immediate access to incredible power, but they've also invited a force into their being that will eventually destroy them from within. This makes the choice to consume Bayle's heart a form of magical suicide, bombing gaining enough power to accomplish great deeds while knowing that those deeds will ultimately cost everything. The practice of Dragon Communion ultimately represents one of Elden Ring's most complex moral and philosophical questions. Is the pursuit of power worth the loss of humanity? Can the ends justify the means when the means involve consuming the hearts of intelligent beings? Are the practitioners heroes who sacrifice their humanity for the greater good, or are they predators who prey on creatures they claim to revere? The answer, like so much in Elden Ring, depends on perspective. From the human viewpoint, Dragon Communion offers a path to power that can be used to protect others, to overcome seemingly impossible challenges, and to achieve goals that would be impossible through conventional means. From the dragon perspective, it represents cannibalism, violation, and the exploitation of their death for human benefit. What's certain is that Dragon Communion changed the relationship between humans and dragons forever. It created a dynamic where dragons became valuable, not just as threats to be overcome, but as resources to be harvested. This commodification of dragon essence added a new layer of complexity to an already fraught relationship, ensuring that true peace between the species would become even more difficult to achieve. The dragons that players encounter most frequently in their journey through the lands between are fundamentally different creatures from their ancient predecessors. These modern dragons, also known as drakes, represent an evolutionary adaptation to a world that no longer favors the immortal stone giants of old. Their story is one of survival through transformation, of power redefined, and of finding new ways to thrive in circumstances that would have destroyed less adaptable creatures. Dragons are the mortal descendants of the ancient dragons who once ruled the lands between during a prehistoric era. Unlike their predecessors, their fleshy hides bore no gravel stone scales. They possessed fewer limbs and flew on feathered wings. Their snouts were more narrow and terminated in diminutive maxillary beaks. This description highlights the fundamental differences that separate the modern dragons from their ancient ancestors. The loss of gravel stone scales represents more than just a change in protection. It symbolizes the transformation from immortal beings of living rock to mortal creatures of flesh and blood. The reduction in limbs is particularly significant. Where ancient dragons possessed 4 legs plus their wings, modern dragons have only 2 legs, with their wings serving the function of 4 limbs. This change represents a shift from beings who could dominate both land and air to creatures that are primarily aerial, trading terrestrial power for enhanced flight capability. The dragons were idolized by humans for their sheer strength and sublime beauty. However, the ancient dragons viewed them as lowborn, paltry imitations. This relationship reveals a complex dynamic within dragon society. From the human perspective, these modern dragons remained awe-inspiring creatures worthy of reverence and fear. Their power, while diminished from ancient levels, was still far beyond anything humans could match through conventional means. But from the ancient dragon perspective, these descendants were disappointments, shadows of what dragonkind had once been. The Dragon King's cragblade refers to the dragons currently in the lands between as paltry, suggesting a dismissive view of their reduced status compared to the ancient dragons of old. While the drakes inherited the fiery breath of their forebears, they could not channel their red lightning. This loss of lightning mastery represents perhaps the most significant diminishment from ancient to modern dragon capabilities. Red lightning wasn't just a weapon for the ancient dragons. It was a symbol of their connection to cosmic forces, their ability to command the fundamental powers of creation and destruction. Modern dragons limited to fire breath were reduced to more conventional forms of attack, however devastating those might be. Yet their vivacious red hearts were covered in sacred gravel stones. Despite their reduced capabilities, modern dragons retained a connection to their ancient heritage through their hearts. These organs, protected by the same gravel stones that had once armored their ancestors' entire bodies, contained the essential draconic power that could be extracted through dragon communion. The heart's protection by gravel stones suggests that the core essence of dragonkind remained unchanged even as their external forms evolved. The modern dragon's adaptation to their changed circumstances demonstrates remarkable resilience and creativity. Faced with a world that no longer supported their ancestors' way of life, they didn't simply decline into extinction. Instead, they found new ecological niches, developed new survival strategies, and established new relationships with the creatures and forces around them. Dragons who settled in northern Caelid with their mother, elder dragon Greyoll, the family groups that formed around elder dragons like Greyoll, show that modern dragons retained the social bonds that had characterized their ancestors. Rather than becoming solitary creatures, they maintained family structures that provided mutual protection and support. The red-eyed flying dragons that surround Greyoll demonstrate the lengths to which these creatures would go to protect their kin. Elder dragon Greyoll was the mother of all dragons, dwarfing all who stood before her like a looming mountain. Many dragons in the current age descend from elder dragon Greyoll, a mother drake of colossal size. Greyoll represents the evolutionary bridge between ancient dragons and their modern descendants, carrying forward the reproductive capacity that would ensure the survival of dragonkind even after the age of stone-scaled immortals had ended. Following the Battle of Aeonia, Greyoll and her offspring fled the Scarlet Rot by settling on a plateau in the northern reaches of Caelid, later known as Greyoll's Dragon Barrow. The Battle of Aeonia was the catastrophic confrontation between Malenia and Redan that resulted in the blooming of the Scarlet Rot across southern Caelid. This fungal plague transformed the landscape into a hellish wasteland where nothing could survive unchanged. For dragons, beings of fire and lightning, the encroaching rot represented an existential threat. The decision to flee wasn't made lightly. Dragons are proud creatures, and retreat from any threat would have gone against their fundamental nature. But Greyoll's responsibility as mother to all dragons superseded pride. She had offspring to protect, a lineage to preserve, and the wisdom to recognize that sometimes survival requires tactical withdrawal rather than heroic last stands. The dragons that escaped the scarlet rot and made nest on the plateau to Caelid's north. Thus it was named Dragonbarrow, and none dared to enter. The choice of Dragonbarrow as their refuge was strategic. The elevated plateau provided natural defenses against ground-based threats and offered some protection from the advancing rot. The name Dragonbarrow itself suggests that this became more than just a temporary refuge. It became a permanent dragon stronghold, a place so thoroughly claimed by dragons that other creatures avoided it entirely. Some modern dragons adapted by forming new relationships with other powers in the lands between. Dragons imbued with glintstone roost atop the moonlight altar in western Liurnia of the lakes. They can exhale glintstone breath which inflicts magic damage. The glintstone dragons represent a fascinating example of draconic adaptation, incorporating the magical traditions of human sorcerers into their own abilities. Smarag was a devourer of sorcerers, and over time his body became corrupted by their glintstones. Smarag's transformation shows how modern dragons were capable of evolving through interaction with other magical traditions. By consuming sorcerers, he gradually incorporated their glintstone magic into his own being, trading his natural fire breath for magical abilities that proved more effective in his chosen environment. Similarly, Adula, a devourer of sorcerers, was bested by Ranni and subsequently swore a knightly oath to her dark moon. Adula's relationship with Ranni demonstrates another form of adaptation. Rather than maintaining the aloof independence of the ancient dragons, modern dragons proved capable of forming genuine allegiances with powerful humans, trading their service for protection and purpose. Other dragons adapted to specific environmental challenges. Borealis, the freezing fog, demonstrates how dragons could modify their breath weapons to match their chosen habitats. Well before the first astrologers and the Erdtree, ice dragons held dominion over the mountaintops. Sometime later, they were defeated by the fire giants who drove them from Flame Peak. Borealis represents the descendants of these ice dragons, creatures who had learned to weaponize cold instead of heat. Decaying Ekzykes represents perhaps the most tragic example of draconic adaptation. A dragon plagued by scarlet rot encountered northwest of the Cathedral of Dragon Communion, also known as the Dragon Communion Revenger. Ekzykes did not forget his hatred even as he succumbed to the rot. Ekzykes shows how some dragons dealt with forces they couldn't escape or overcome by incorporating them into their own being and weaponizing them against their enemies. Ekzykes, Dragon Communion Revenger, did not forget his hatred even as he succumbed to the scarlet rot. His title, as Dragon Communion Revenger, suggests a personal grudge against the practice of consuming dragon hearts, positioning himself as a guardian of the cathedral to prevent humans from accessing the altar within. Even in his corrupted state, Ekzykes maintained purpose and agency, turning his affliction into a weapon against those he saw as threats to his kind. The modern dragon's relationship with magic represents a significant departure from their ancestors' capabilities. While ancient dragons commanded red lightning through their inherent nature, modern dragons had to learn, adapt, and sometimes steal magical abilities from other sources. While Rois Porperios and Sesinsius, modern dragons had to learn, adapt, and sometimes steal magical abilities from other sources. This difference highlights the fundamental change in dragons' place in the world, from beings who embodied natural law to creatures who had to work within systems created by others. Flying Dragon Ekzykes provides an example of how modern dragons established themselves in the post-ancient world. Wandering nobles in the ruins around the lake chant Ekzykes' name, praying that it will burn them to ash. Ekzykes has established himself as a territorial presence in southern Limgrave, commanding respect and even worship from the local human population. This represents a very different relationship than the formal alliances of the ancient dragon cult. It's more primal, based on immediate fear and awe rather than theological synthesis. The territorial nature of most modern dragons reflects their reduced numbers and increased vulnerability. Unlike the ancient dragons who could afford to be cosmopolitan rulers of vast domains, Modern dragons needed to establish and defend specific territories where they could control resources and minimize threats. This led to the pattern of named dragons being associated with particular locations: Ekzykes with his lake, Smarag with the academy approaches, Adula with Ranni's territories. The modern dragon's mortality also changed their relationship with time and legacy. Ancient dragons could afford to think in terms of eons, making plans that spanned millennia and treating temporary setbacks as minor inconveniences. Modern dragons, facing finite lifespans, had to make more immediate decisions about how to spend their time and energy. This urgency contributed to their willingness to form alliances, adapt to new circumstances, and take risks that their ancestors would have considered beneath their dignity. Despite their reduced circumstances, modern dragons retained the capacity to inspire awe and terror in other creatures. The strength of a mighty dragon, magnificent but deadly. Their power, while not matching that of the ancients, remained formidable by any other standard. A single modern dragon could still devastate armies, level fortifications, and command respect from the greatest human heroes. The story of the modern dragons is ultimately one of successful adaptation. Faced with the complete transformation of their world, the loss of their god, the reduction of their power, and the rise of new cosmic orders, they found ways to survive and even thrive. Their descendants continue to soar through the skies of the lands between, carrying forward the draconic legacy in new forms that their ancient ancestors might not recognize but would hopefully come to respect. Among the modern dragons that populate the lands between, none demonstrate the adaptability and cunning of their species better than the glintstone dragons. These remarkable creatures represent a fascinating case study in draconic evolution, showing how dragons could not only survive in a world dominated by human magic, but actually thrive by incorporating that magic into their own beings. The stories of Smarag and Adula reveal different paths to the same goal, the acquisition of power through transformation and adaptation. Smarag was a devourer of sorcerers, and over time his body became corrupted by their glintstones. The term corrupted here might seem negative, but in the context of draconic adaptation, it represents successful evolution. Smarag didn't accidentally become infused with glintstone. He deliberately consumed sorcerers specifically to acquire their magical properties. This was a conscious choice to transform himself into something new and more powerful. The process of this transformation must have been gradual and probably quite painful. A devourer of sorcerers whose body gradually became corrupted by the glintstones of those he ate. As Smarag consumed more and more practitioners of glintstone sorcery, their magical essence began to physically alter his draconic form. His scales took on the crystalline properties of glintstone, his breath weapon changed from conventional fire to magical energy, and his very flesh became a hybrid of draconic tissue and crystallized magic. This transformation wasn't random mutation, it was purposeful adaptation. Smarag recognized that the old ways of dragonkind were insufficient for the new world he inhabited. Rather than clinging to traditional fire breath and relying on physical intimidation alone, he sought to incorporate the magical innovations that humans had developed during their rise to prominence. By consuming sorcerers, he was essentially downloading their accumulated knowledge and power directly into his own being. Superior incantation of dragon communion channels the power of Smarag the glintstone dragon, transforms caster into a dragon to spew magic breath from above. Charging extends duration. This incantation can be used while jumping. The dragon communion incantation that channels Smarag's power reveals the effectiveness of his transformation. His magical breath became so potent that humans who consumed his heart could temporarily take on his form and wield similar abilities. This represents a complete reversal of the original power dynamic. Instead of humans stealing dragon power, we see a dragon who successfully stole human power and made it his own. The location where Smarag established himself is also significant. Glintstone dragon Smarag is encountered near an island west of the Academy of Lucaria and north of the Temple Quarter, guarding a glintstone sorcerer corpse that holds the first Academy glintstone key. Smarag positioned himself as a guardian of access to the Academy itself, the premier institution of magical learning in the lands between. This wasn't coincidental. He was literally feeding on the source of magical knowledge, positioning himself where he could most easily acquire new sorcerers to consume. The fact that he was guarding an Academy glintstone key suggests that Smarag understood the importance of controlling access to magical education. By preventing unworthy humans from reaching the Academy, he was essentially curating the quality of sorcerers available for consumption, while also serving as a final examination for those brave enough to face him. Based on this strategic positioning, it appears that only the most skilled and determined magic users would be able to overcome him to reach the Academy, ensuring that the sorcerers he did eventually consume would be of the highest caliber. Glintstone Dragon Adula represents a different but equally fascinating approach to magical adaptation. Where Smarag consumed sorcerers to gain their power through absorption, Adula chose the path of alliance and service. Adula, a devourer of sorcerers, was bested by Ranni and subsequently swore a knightly oath to her dark moon. This represents a complete transformation of traditional dragon-human relationships. The phrase, devourer of sorcerers, indicates that Adula initially followed a similar path to Smarag, acquiring magical power through consumption. However, her encounter with Ranni the Witch changed everything. Rather than being consumed herself or fleeing in defeat, Adula chose to acknowledge Ranni's superiority and offer service. This decision demonstrates a level of wisdom and adaptability that speaks to the evolved nature of modern dragon consciousness. Sorcery of Adula, the glintstone dragon conjures a cold magic greatsword, then delivers a sweeping blow that launches a blade-like projectile of frost. This sorcery can be cast repeatedly. Adula, a devourer of sorcerers, was bested by Ranni and subsequently swore a knightly oath to her dark moon. The sorcery that bears Adula's name reveals the sophisticated nature of her magical abilities. This isn't simply modified fire breath. It's a complex magical working that combines traditional draconic power with advanced sorceress techniques to create something entirely new. The relationship between Adula and Ranni represents one of the most successful examples of dragon-human partnership in the current era. Unlike the ancient dragon cult, which was built on political alliance and religious synthesis, Adula's service to Ranni appears to be based on genuine respect and shared purpose. Based on what we know of Ranni's quest to overthrow the Golden Order and establish a new cosmic order, this would naturally appeal to a dragon whose people had been displaced by that same Golden Order. Adula's knightly oath to the Dark Moon also represents a theological evolution for dragonkind. Where ancient dragons had served their own mysterious god, and later some had joined the ancient dragon cult's synthesis with the Golden Order, Adula chose to serve an entirely different cosmic power. The Dark Moon represents rejection of both the Greater Will's authority and the traditional draconic allegiances, offering a third path that might better serve dragons in the modern world. The two glintstone dragons also demonstrate how magical adaptation could lead to entirely new forms of draconic combat. Glintstone Dragon Adula uses the Glintstone Dragon move pool, but gains access to an extra attack. Both dragons developed unique magical abilities that their ancient predecessors could never have imagined. Where ancient dragons relied on lightning and physical prowess, the Glintstone dragons wielded complex sorceries that required intelligence and creativity rather than just raw power. The magical corruption that transformed these dragons also had defensive benefits. Glintstone dragons have very high magic resistance, so intelligence builds should use spells like Rock Sling that deal physical damage. Their crystalline scales provided protection against the very magical attacks they had learned to wield, making them formidable opponents for human sorcerers who might have expected their magic to be particularly effective against dragons. The geographical distribution of glintstone dragons is also telling. Adula is first encountered outside Ranni's Rise in the Three Sisters north of Courier Manor. After a brief fight, it disappears, only to reappear at the Moonlight Altar outside the Cathedral of Manus Celes. Adula's ability to travel between these locations suggests that her service to Ranni involves more than just passive protection. She actively patrols the territories under Ranni's influence, serving as a mobile defense force. The Moonlight Altar itself holds special significance for the Glintstone dragons. Dragons imbued with glintstone roost atop the Moonlight Altar in western Liurnia of the Lakes. This location, with its connection to moon magic and advanced sorcery, provides an ideal environment for dragons who have incorporated magical elements into their beings. The altar serves as both a source of magical energy and a symbolic connection to the cosmic forces that these dragons now serve. The unnamed glintstone dragons that can be encountered on the Moonlight altar demonstrate that Smarag and Adula weren't unique experiments, but part of a broader pattern of draconic magical adaptation. 3 can be found on the moon-gazing platform west of the Moonlight altar site of Grace. These lesser glintstone dragons suggest that the consumption of sorcerers and the incorporation of glintstone magic had become a viable survival strategy for multiple dragons in the region. The success of the glintstone dragons' adaptation strategy is evidenced by their continued prosperity. Unlike many other dragon populations that seem to be in decline or struggling to survive, the glintstone dragons have established themselves as permanent fixtures of their chosen territories. They've found sustainable ways to maintain and even enhance their power, creating new forms of magic that draw from both draconic and human traditions. The relationship between the glintstone dragons and the Academy of Raya Lucaria also represents a form of symbiosis. While Smarag's consumption of sorcerers might seem purely predatory, it actually serves to regulate access to advanced magical education. Only the most capable and determined sorcerers can overcome his guardianship to reach the academy, ensuring that magical knowledge remains in the hands of those worthy to wield it. This selective pressure created by dragon guardianship might actually have improved the overall quality of magical education in the region. Knowing that they would have to face dragons to access or practice advanced magic would have motivated sorcerers to develop better techniques, stronger defenses, and more creative approaches to magical combat. In a strange way, the glintstone dragons served as unintentional educators, forcing human magic users to evolve their own capabilities. The glintstone dragons represent hope for the future of dragonkind in the lands between. They demonstrate that dragons don't have to choose between clinging to a past that can never be restored and fading into extinction. Instead, they can evolve, adapt, and find new ways to remain relevant and powerful in a changing world. Their magical corruption isn't a sign of degradation but of successful evolution, proof that dragonkind possesses the intelligence and flexibility to thrive under any circumstances. Throughout the lands between, various dragons have established themselves as guardians of specific locations, driven by purposes that range from territorial instinct to deeply personal vendettas. These dragons represent the diversity of modern dragonkind, each finding their own way to exist in a world that no longer recognizes their ancient authority. Their stories reveal how individual dragons have adapted not just physically, but psychologically to the changed circumstances of the current age. Decaying Ekzykes represents perhaps the most tragic and determined of these guardian dragons. A dragon plagued by scarlet rot encountered northwest of the Cathedral of Dragon Communion, also known as the Dragon Communion Revenger. Ekzykes did not forget his hatred even as he succumbed to the scarlet rot. The title, Dragon Communion Revenger, immediately establishes Ekzykes' primary motivation and identity. Unlike many other dragons, who seem to have accepted the new order of the world with varying degrees of resignation, Ekzykes maintains active opposition to the practice of consuming dragon hearts. The phrase, "did not forget his hatred, even as he succumbed to the scarlet rot," reveals the strength of Ekzykes' will and the clarity of his purpose. The scarlet rot is one of the most corrupting forces in the lands between, capable of destroying not just bodies but minds and souls. The fact that Ekzykes maintained his hatred and his sense of purpose despite this corruption speaks to an almost supernatural level of determination. Ekzykes' positioning is not coincidental. He has deliberately placed himself as a guardian of the cathedral, positioning himself where he can intercept and deter anyone seeking to engage in dragon communion. This represents a form of active resistance against the practice, with Ekzykes willing to serve as a living barrier between potential practitioners and the altar where they would consume dragon hearts. The strategic value of this position cannot be understated. The Cathedral of Dragon Communion is one of the primary locations where humans can trade dragon hearts for draconic power. By guarding the site, Ekzykes forces anyone seeking to engage in dragon communion to first prove their worth by overcoming him in battle. This serves multiple purposes. It reduces the number of casual practitioners who might consume dragon hearts on a whim. It ensures that only the most determined and capable humans can access the practice, and it gives Ekzykes the opportunity to personally punish those who would feast on his kindred. Ekzykes has been driven mad by the scarlet rot, and as a result breathes out clouds of toxin that cause scarlet rot buildup on the player. The madness induced by the scarlet rot adds another layer of tragedy to Ekzykes' story. He has not only been physically corrupted by the rot, but mentally affected as well. Yet this madness hasn't destroyed his core purpose. If anything, it might have intensified his hatred and made him more dangerous to those he opposes. The transformation of his breath weapon, from conventional fire to scarlet rot toxin, represents a form of adaptation similar to what we see in other dragons, but with a much darker tone. Where Smarag and Adula chose their transformations and gained power from them, Ekzykes had corruption forced upon him. Yet he found a way to weaponize this affliction, turning his suffering into a tool for revenge against those who would harm other dragons. Borealis, the freezing fog, represents another unique adaptation to both environment and circumstance. This greater foe continually emits a stream of frost during combat, limiting player visibility and inflicting frostbite damage. His ability to alter the very atmosphere around him speaks to a form of power that goes beyond simple breath weapons into environmental manipulation on a large scale. Superior incantation of dragon communion channels the power of Borealis, the freezing fog, transforms caster into a dragon to spew icy breath from above. Charging extends the duration. This incantation can be cast while jumping. Borealis represents the surviving descendant of the ice dragon lineage. His power, channeled through dragon communion, gives us insight into what the original ice dragons must have been capable of. Well before the first astrologers and the Erdtree, ice dragons held dominion over the mountaintops. Sometime later, they were defeated by the fire giants who drove them from Flame Peak. The ice dragons were once lords of the mountaintops long ago, until they were defeated by the fire giants and chased from the peak. This history shows that modern dragons faced constant challenges to their territorial claims, requiring them to adapt not just to environmental changes but to military defeats and displacement by other powerful creatures. Borealis crafted around itself a snowy fog and controls frost. Modern ice dragons like Borealis adapted to their defeat by developing new survival strategies. Rather than trying to reclaim their lost mountaintop territories, they found ways to create their own localized ice environments wherever they settled. Borealis surrounds himself with freezing fog, essentially carrying a piece of the ice dragon's natural habitat with him wherever he goes. Flying dragon Greyoll established himself as a territorial presence in southern Limgrave. Wandering nobles in the ruins around the lake chant Greyoll's name, praying that it will burn them to ash. Greyoll has established a different kind of relationship with the local human population than we see in other dragon territories. This is not the formal alliance of the ancient dragon cult or the scholarly relationship of the glintstone dragons. It's something more primal. The worship that Greyoll receives from the wandering nobles suggests that he has established himself as a local deity of sorts, commanding respect through raw power and immediate presence rather than through theological frameworks or political alliances. The fact that the nobles pray for him to burn them to ash indicates a death cult mentality, where the dragon represents both terror and a form of transcendent destruction. Flying Dragon Greyoll demonstrates how dragons can occupy and control specific territories in the current age. Greyoll is encountered on the bridge leading to Bestial Sanctum, serving as an obstacle that must be overcome to reach that location. This positioning suggests that Greyoll either serves as a guardian of the sanctum, preventing unworthy travelers from reaching it, or simply claims that territory as his hunting ground. The various ghost flame dragons encountered throughout the lands between represent yet another form of draconic adaptation. Ancient dragon Fortissax is found before reaching the summit of Jagged Peak. It is likely Fortissax was one of the ancient dragons who sided with the betrayer over their lord Placidusax. Fortissax's presence in the Jagged Peak area, near Bayle's domain, suggests that he was one of the ancient dragons who chose to follow Bayle in his rebellion. The ghost flame dragons wield a unique purple-tinted fire that seems to bridge the gap between conventional dragonfire and death-related magic. This might represent an evolution that occurred in dragons who remained in the realm of shadow after Bayle's banishment, adapting to the unique conditions of that separate realm. The distribution of dragons across the lands between tells a story of adaptation to various environmental and social niches. Each dragon has found a way to exist that suits their individual capabilities and circumstances. Some, like Greyoll, claim territories and establish dominance through raw power. Others, like the glintstone dragons, integrate themselves into existing human magical traditions. Still others, like Ekzykes, define themselves through opposition to practices they view as violations of their kind. The diversity of these approaches demonstrates that modern dragons, despite their reduced power compared to their ancient predecessors, retain the intelligence and adaptability that allowed their ancestors to rule the lands between for eons. They are not simply following instinct or clinging to outdated patterns. They are actively making choices about how to exist in the current world. The territorial nature of most guardian dragons reflects both practical necessity and psychological adaptation. With reduced numbers and increased vulnerability compared to ancient times, modern dragons need to establish and defend specific territories where they can control resources and minimize threats. The territory provides not just hunting grounds, but a sphere of influence where the dragon can maintain some measure of the authority their kind once wielded universally. The various dragon guardians also serve important narrative functions in the game world. They mark significant locations, test the player's capabilities, and provide context for the regions they inhabit. But beyond these gameplay functions, they represent the continuing existence of dragonkind in an age that no longer truly belongs to them. They are living reminders of a more ancient world, creatures out of time trying to find their place in an era of humans and gods. The Night of Black Knives represents one of the most pivotal and tragic events in the history of the lands between, setting in motion the chain of events that would lead to the shattering and the current broken state of the world. For the dragons, and particularly for ancient dragon Fortissax, this night marked the beginning of a different kind of tragedy, one that would transform a bond of friendship into a curse of corruption and demonstrate that even the strongest loyalties can become sources of profound suffering. On the Night of Black Knives, Godwyn was slain by assassins. Godwyn would die in soul alone, with his body condemned to undeath as it mutated beyond recognition. The assassination of Godwyn the Golden was meticulously planned and executed using weapons forged from fragments of the Rune of Death, creating a form of death that was incomplete and corrupted. Rather than dying cleanly and completely, Godwyn experienced a partial death that left his soul destroyed while his body lived on in a horrifically transformed state. This curse mark was carved at the moment of death of the first demigod and should have taken the shape of a circle. However, 2 demigods perished at the same time, breaking the curse mark into 2 half-wheels. Ranni was the first of the demigods whose flesh perished, while the Prince of Death perished in soul alone. The ritual death that occurred that night was designed to allow Ranni to shed her physical form while preserving her soul. But the splitting of the curse mark meant that Godwyn received the opposite fate. His body survived while his soul was destroyed. For Fortissax, who had formed a deep bond of friendship with Godwyn after their initial conflict, the news of his friend's assassination and subsequent corruption must have been devastating beyond comprehension. After Godwyn the Golden became the Prince of Death, the ancient dragon fought long and hard against the death within its companion. Alas, victory was never achieved, and its only reward was corruption. Fortissax's response to his friend's condition reveals the depth of their bond and the extent of draconic loyalty. The phrase, "fought long and hard against the death within," suggests that Fortissax didn't simply stand by and mourn his friend's fate. Instead, he actively engaged in combat against the forces of death that were consuming Godwyn's undead form. This wasn't a battle in the conventional sense. It was a mystical struggle against corruption itself, with Fortissax using his ancient draconic power to try to cleanse or contain the death blight that was spreading through his friend's transformed body. The futility of this struggle is emphasized by the statement that victory was never achieved. Despite Fortissax's incredible power, despite his mastery of red lightning and his stone-scaled resilience, despite his determination and loyalty, he could not overcome the forces that had been set in motion by the assassin's blades. The Rune of Death was a fundamental force of the cosmos, and even an ancient dragon could not simply reverse its effects through force of will. The price of this failed struggle was Fortissax's own corruption. His only reward was corruption. In attempting to save his friend, Fortissax exposed himself to the same death blight that was consuming Godwyn. The corruption that transformed him from ancient dragon Fortissax into lich dragon Fortissax represents one of the most tragic transformations in the game, a being of life and lightning becoming a creature of death and decay. Incantation that channels the power of the ancient dragon Fortissax, now corrupted by death, inflicts death blight upon foes. Charging extends duration of the storm. It is said that this golden lightning was wielded by Godwyn, who befriended Fortissax. The corruption of Fortissax's lightning, from its original red to the golden hue associated with Godwyn, and then to the death-touched lightning he wields as a lich dragon, tells the story of his transformation in magical terms. His power, once pure draconic force, became infected with the same death blight that consumed his friend. The irony is that Fortissax's transformation allowed him to continue fighting alongside Godwyn in a sense, but not in the way either of them would have chosen. As lich dragon Fortissax, he became a guardian of Godwyn's corrupted remains, protecting the Prince of Death from those who would disturb his undead slumber. This protection might represent continued loyalty, but its loyalty transformed into something dark and twisted by the forces that corrupted them both. Lich dragon Fortissax is encountered during Fia's questline, appearing in what seems to be a deathbed dream or mindscape when the player touches Fia as she lies with Godwyn's corrupted remains. This encounter suggests that Fortissax continues to guard his friend even in death, manifesting as a shade or echo to defend Godwyn from anyone who might threaten or disturb him. The battle with lich dragon Fortissax takes on additional meaning when understood in this context. The player isn't simply fighting a corrupted dragon, they're confronting the guardian of Godwyn's final rest, a being whose corruption stems from absolute loyalty to a friend. Defeating Fortissax in this encounter might represent freeing him from his tormented guardianship, allowing both him and Godwyn to finally find peace. The weapons and incantations that can be obtained from Fortissax's remembrance reflect both his original nature and his corrupted state. Fortissax's lightning spear channels his ancient power over red lightning, while death lightning represents his transformed abilities after corruption by death blight. These items serve as permanent reminders of both his heroic friendship with Godwyn and the tragic price he paid for that loyalty. The relationship between Fortissax and Fia adds another layer of complexity to the dragon's story. Fia, as a deathbed companion, seeks to comfort those who live in death and ultimately to create a new cosmic order that would legitimize their existence. Her interaction with Godwyn's remains and the summoning of lich dragon Fortissax suggests that the dragon's corrupted essence has become intertwined with the very forces that Fia seeks to legitimize and control. The tragedy of Fortissax's devotion extends beyond his personal transformation to what it represents about the nature of loyalty itself. His story demonstrates that even the most noble and selfless acts can lead to corruption and suffering, that good intentions cannot always protect against the consequences of engaging with forces beyond one's understanding, and that love and friendship can become sources of torment when the objects of that affection are themselves corrupted or lost. Fortissax's fate also serves as a reflection on the broader theme of transformation that runs throughout Elden Ring. Just as Dragon Communion practitioners are gradually transformed by the draconic essence they consume, just as magma wyrms represent the end result of unchecked ambition, Fortissax shows us that transformation can come through love and loyalty, as well as through hunger for power. The corruption that claimed him wasn't the result of greed or ambition, but of selfless devotion to a friend in need. The golden lightning that Fortissax and Godwyn once wielded together, a symbol of their friendship and the successful synthesis between dragon and human power, became transformed into something dark and deadly through the forces unleashed on the Night of Black Knives. This transformation of their shared power serves as a metaphor for how the corruption of Deathblight can twist even the most beautiful and meaningful relationships into sources of suffering and darkness. In the end, Fortissax's story stands as perhaps the most poignant example of draconic loyalty in all of Elden Ring's lore. His willingness to sacrifice himself in a futile attempt to save his friend, His continued guardianship, even after corruption, transformed him into something monstrous, and his ultimate fate as a boss to be defeated by players. All serve to demonstrate both the nobility and the tragedy inherent in absolute devotion. The friendship between Godwyn and Fortissax, which had once represented the possibility of peace between species, became in the end a monument to how even the most beautiful bonds can be corrupted by forces beyond our control. The shadow of the Erdtree DLC brings the ancient conflict between Dragon Lord Placidusax and Bayle the Dread to its ultimate conclusion, revealing details about their primordial battle and providing players with the opportunity to finish what began eons ago. The content of this expansion adds crucial context to the Dragon lore established in the base game, while introducing new characters and concepts that deepen our understanding of draconic civilization and its ultimate fate. Bayle the Dread, forefather of the Drakes and sworn enemy of the ancient dragons, is finally encountered at the summit of Jagged Peak in the realm of Shadow. His appearance tells the story of his ancient battle with Placidusax in vivid, horrifying detail. Bayle is a massive black and red dragon with red eyes and 3 curved horns angled downward. His appearance is heavily scarred and damaged from his battle with Placidusax. His wings have been heavily torn and shredded with the bones protruding out of his skin. His left leg has been ripped off entirely, and the remaining heads of Placidusax appear to have been bitten deep into his bony back. The permanent nature of these wounds, preserved across millennia, speaks to the cosmic significance of the battle between these two titans. 2 of Placidusax's lost heads can be found still clinging onto the underside of Bayle's neck. The ancient dragons who sided with Bayle against Placidusax wielded the branching red lightning. Even in the realm of Shadow, cut off from the normal flow of time and space, the evidence of their mutual destruction remains visible and active. The presence of Placidusax's severed heads, still biting into Bayle's flesh, creates a grotesque image that perfectly captures the nature of their conflict. This wasn't a clean battle with a clear victor. It was a mutually destructive struggle that left both participants permanently scarred. The heads don't just rest on Bayle's back. They actively bite into him, their hatred and determination preserved across the ages. The realm of Shadow itself provides the perfect prison and kingdom for Bayle and his followers. Cut off from the main lands between, this shadowy reflection of the world became home to the dragons who had chosen to follow the rebellious Bayle rather than remain loyal to Placidusax. Here, separated from the cosmic forces that governed the main world, Bayle and his descendants developed into something new and different from their ancient dragon origins. The path to confronting Bayle leads through Jagged Peak, a treacherous mountain that serves as both his fortress and his monument. The journey up the peak reveals the cost of Bayle's rebellion. The slopes are littered with the corpses of dragons, some still locked in eternal combat with each other. This dragon graveyard tells the story of a civilization that turned on itself, where the civil war between Placidusax's loyalists and Bayle's rebels continued long after their leaders had wounded each other into semi-retirement. Ancient dragon Senesax, encountered on the path to Bayle's summit, represents one of the ancient dragons who chose to side with the rebel against their former lord. Found before reaching the summit of Jagged Peak, it is likely Senesax was one of the ancient dragons who sided with the betrayer over their lord Placidusax, as mentioned in the red lightning pot description. The fact that ancient dragons, beings of living stone and lightning, who had served Placidusax for eons, chose to rebel alongside Bayle speaks to either the persuasive power of his cause or the compelling nature of his vision for Dragon's future. The confrontation with Bayle himself is facilitated by one of the most memorable NPCs in all of Elden Ring, Eygon the Drake Warrior, whose obsession with the Dread Dragon provides both context and emotional weight to the encounter. "Curse you, Bayle. I hereby vow you will rue this day. Behold, a true Drake Warrior, and I, Eygon, your fears made flesh. Solid of scale you might be, foul dragon, but I will riddle with holes your rotten hide, with a hail of harpoons, with every last drop of my being." Eygon's passionate hatred for Bayle, delivered in some of the most memorable voice acting in the game, provides a very human perspective on the ancient draconic conflict. Dragon Slayer Eygon, a particularly obsessive Drake warrior, was one such mortal. Eygon faced Bayle but was left broken in both body and spirit by their battle. Aegon's condition, when players first encounter him leagueless and consumed by an obsessive desire for revenge, demonstrates the kind of destruction that Bayle could inflict even on seasoned dragon hunters. Yet rather than being deterred by his defeat, Aegon's hatred only intensified, making him the perfect ally for the final confrontation. The relationship between Aegon and Bayle echoes classical literature, particularly the dynamic between Captain Ahab and Moby Dick. Both represent men who have been physically and psychologically destroyed by their encounters with legendary beasts, yet who cannot abandon their quests for revenge despite the obvious futility and self-destructive nature of their obsessions. Ancient dragon Fortissax, also known as the Dragon Communion Priestess, provides crucial exposition about the true origins of Dragon Communion and Bayle's role in draconic history. Each night, she offers her sleep to her Lord Placidusax and is susceptible to a sleep-inducing tonic. Fortissax has been enticing young warriors to partake in Dragon Communion from the grand altar of Dragon Communion near the foot of Jagged Peak. She encourages the Tarnished to seek out Bayle the Dread, to kill him and consume his heart on behalf of her lord. Fortissax's revelation that Dragon Communion was created specifically to hunt Bayle and his descendants provides the missing context for the practice's origins. Long ago, Fortissax assumed human form to share Dragon Communion with the world. Now she has acquired a human heart. Her transformation from ancient dragon to human priestess represents the ultimate sacrifice made in service to Placidusax's desire for revenge. She gave up her immortal stone form and immense power to walk among mortals and teach them to become weapons against Bayle. The grand altar of Dragon Communion, located near the base of Jagged Peak, represents the original and purest form of the practice. Unlike the smaller altars found throughout the lands between, this altar was created specifically for the war against Bayle, and it's here that his heart must ultimately be consumed if his power is to be claimed. The heart of Bayle itself represents one of the most dangerous and potent magical artifacts in the game. The biventricle heart of Bayle the Dread, dotted with horn-like gravel stones and glistening with deep red liquor, gorge upon this at the grand altar of Dragon Communion to absorb Bayle's power, the purest form of communion, in the words of its priestess. The description emphasizes both the power contained within the heart and the danger it represents to anyone who would consume it. Even after being consumed, the throbbing heart of Bayle continues to resist its subjugation, never weakening. One day, the fire within will consume the very body and soul of its communion devourer. This warning makes clear that consuming Bayle's heart isn't truly gaining his power, it's inviting his consciousness into one's own body, where it will work tirelessly to claim control and eventually consume the host entirely. The battle with Bayle represents the culmination of multiple storylines that have been building throughout both the base game and the DLC. For Placidusax's followers, it represents the completion of their lord's revenge and the final resolution of the ancient draconic civil war. For Dragon Communion practitioners, it represents access to the ultimate source of draconic power. For Aegon, it represents the fulfillment of his obsessive quest for vengeance. Unlike Placidusax, Bayle seems to be able to regenerate his missing limbs. During his second phase, he manages to restore 2 of his wings that he had lost during his mortal fight against his nemesis. This regenerative ability, possibly connected to his association with crucible-like powers, allows Bayle to literally rise above his previous limitations during the fight, manifesting spectral wings that grant him renewed mobility and new attack options. The implications of Bayle's defeat extend far beyond the immediate resolution of his storyline. With both Bayle and eventually Placidusax defeated by the Tarnished, the ancient draconic civil war finally comes to an end. The last of the great ancient dragons have fallen, their conflicts resolved not by draconic might, but by the intervention of an outsider who serves neither faction. This resolution raises questions about the future of dragonkind in the lands between. With the ancient dragons gone and their rebellious counterparts defeated, what remains of dragon civilization? The modern dragons continue to exist, but they lack the cosmic authority and temporal power that defined their predecessors. The Age of Dragons, which began with Placidusax's rule, and continued through rebellion and civil war, finally ends with the defeat of its last great champions. The Dragon Communion incantations that can be gained from Bayle's Heart, Bayle's Flame Lightning, and Bayle's Tyranny represent the final synthesis of the power that drove the ancient draconic conflict. These spells combine the fire and lightning that define dragon power, creating abilities that transcend the limitations of either element alone. In a sense, they represent what dragon power might have become if the civil war had never occurred, if the species had found ways to evolve and grow rather than tear itself apart through internal conflict. The story of Bayle's final confrontation ultimately serves as both conclusion and beginning. It concludes the ancient storylines that began with the first betrayal in Farum Azula, but it also begins a new chapter in the relationship between humans and dragons. With the last of the ancient dragons defeated, the remaining dragons must find new ways to exist in a world increasingly dominated by human civilization. The power gained through Dragon Communion will continue to transform humans into draconic forms, but without the original context of vengeance against Bayle, the practice may evolve into something entirely different. The cycle continues, as it always has in the lands between, but perhaps with the ancient grudges finally settled, there's hope for something new to emerge from the ashes of the old. As our comprehensive journey through the lore of Elden Ring's dragons draws to a close, we find ourselves contemplating not just where these magnificent creatures have been, but where they might be going. The dragons of the lands between have witnessed the rise and fall of gods, the transformation of entire civilizations, and the endless cycle of power that seems to define existence in this fractured world. Their story, from the primordial age of dragons to the current era of the Tarnished, represents one of the most complete narrative arcs in all of From Software's mythology. The dragons we encounter as players represent the endpoint of millions of years of evolution, adaptation, and survival. From the immortal stone titans who once ruled with divine authority to the flesh and blood descendants who struggle to find their place in a world dominated by human civilization, dragonkind has demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability. They have survived the departure of their god, a civil war that tore their society apart, the rise of competing cosmic orders, and the gradual diminishment of their power and influence. Yet survival has come at tremendous cost. The ancient dragons, those magnificent beings of living stone who commanded red lightning and existed partially outside the flow of time, are essentially extinct. Placidusax waits in his storm beyond time for a god that will never return. Fortissax has been corrupted by his loyalty to a dead friend. Lanciax has taken human form to serve new masters. The dragons who remain are shadows of what their predecessors once were, reduced to territorial guardians, magical curiosities, or sources of power for human practitioners of Dragon Communion. The practice of Dragon Communion itself represents perhaps the most complex aspect of the current relationship between humans and dragons. Born from Placidusax's desire for revenge against Bayle, it has evolved into something far beyond its original purpose. Humans who consume dragon hearts don't just gain power, they gradually transform into something that is neither fully human nor fully dragon. The magma wyrms that crawl through the lands between serve as permanent warnings about the ultimate cost of this transformation. Yet the practice continues to attract heroes and adventurers who believe they can control forces that have destroyed everyone who came before them. The irony of Dragon Communion is that it might represent the future of dragonkind in a way that none of its creators intended. As humans transform through consumption of dragon hearts, they become carriers of draconic essence in new forms. The dragons may have lost their original bodies and consciousness, but their power lives on in new hybrid forms that blend human intelligence with draconic might. In a sense, the species is evolving rather than going extinct, finding new expressions through the very practice that was designed to hunt them to extinction. The geographical distribution of dragons throughout the lands between tells its own story about adaptation and survival. From Aguil's territorial control of his lake to the glintstone dragon's integration with human magical traditions, from Greyoll's protective isolation in Dragonbarrow to Borealis's mastery of environmental manipulation, each surviving dragon has found a unique niche that allows them to exist in the post-ancient world. They no longer rule as cosmic authorities, but they remain forces to be respected and feared. The relationship between dragons and the various factions, and powers of the current era reveals the complexity of their position in the world. Some, like Adula, have formed genuine alliances with human powers. Others, like Ekzykes, maintain active opposition to human activities that threaten dragonkind. Still others seem to exist in a state of resigned isolation, neither actively opposing nor embracing the new order, but simply trying to survive in whatever form they can maintain. The weapons, spells, and items that can be crafted from dragon remains or gained through dragon communion represent the commodification of draconic power in the modern world. Dragons are no longer just threats to be overcome or rulers to be obeyed. They have become resources to be harvested, their very essence transformed into tools that humans can use to enhance their own capabilities. This transformation of dragons from subjects to objects represents perhaps the most fundamental change in their status since the Age of Dragons ended. Yet even in death, dragons retain agency and power. The hearts that grant draconic abilities to human practitioners are not passive magical components, but active forces that retain aspects of their original owner's consciousness and will. The strongest of these hearts, particularly Bayle's, actively resist their consumption and work to eventually claim control of those who consume them. In this way, dragons may achieve a form of immortality and revenge that their living forms could never accomplish. The environmental impact of dragons on the lands between remains visible throughout the world. The eternal winter of the mountaintops still bears the mark of ancient ice dragon rule. A scarred landscape of Kelid reflects the desperate flight of dragons from the scarlet rot. The floating ruins of Farum Azula, suspended in their storm beyond time, stand as monuments to what dragon civilization once achieved. Even in their reduced circumstances, dragons continue to shape the world around them through their presence and their power. The magical traditions that have grown up around dragons, from the ancient dragon cult to dragon communion to the various specialized techniques developed by different dragon types, represent lasting contributions to the magical knowledge of the lands between. These practices will likely continue to evolve and develop long after the last true dragons have died, ensuring that draconic power and wisdom remain accessible to future generations, even if dragons themselves do not. The story of Elden Ring's dragons ultimately serves as a meditation on themes of adaptation, loyalty, transformation, and the price of power. It shows us civilizations that can endure cosmic upheaval, friendships that transcend species boundaries, the corruption that can result from the noblest intentions, and the ways in which power can both elevate and destroy those who seek it. Perhaps most importantly, the dragon lore of Elden Ring demonstrates that endings are rarely complete and beginnings are never clean. The Age of Dragons didn't end with a single catastrophic event, but faded gradually through a series of betrayals, defeats, and adaptations. The Age of Human Dominion that followed doesn't represent complete victory over the dragons, but rather a new form of coexistence in which dragon power continues to exist in new forms and new contexts. As players of Elden Ring, we participate in this ongoing story. Every time we face a dragon in combat, every time we consume a dragon heart, every time we use an incantation or weapon derived from draconic power, we are not separate from the history we've explored but active participants in its latest chapter, helping to determine whether the relationship between humans and dragons will be defined by dominance and exploitation or by understanding and cooperation. The dragons of Elden Ring, in all their forms and throughout all their ages, stand as testaments to the complexity and richness of From Software's world-building. They are not simply obstacles to be overcome or sources of power to be exploited, but fully realized beings with their own histories, motivations, and tragedies. Their stories interweave with every other aspect of the game's lore, creating a web of connections and relationships that rewards careful study and contemplation. In the end, the lore of Elden Ring's dragons reminds us that in a world defined by cycles of rise and fall, by the constant struggle between order and chaos, by the eternal dance of power and transformation, survival requires not just strength but wisdom, not just power but adaptability, and not just victory but understanding. The dragons who have survived to the Age of the Tarnished are those who learned these lessons, and their continued existence suggests that perhaps there is hope for lasting peace between the species. After all, the majestic creatures that soar through the skies of the lands between, that guard ancient secrets and wield powers beyond human comprehension, that inspire both fear and wonder in all who encounter them, represent more than just mythological beasts or gameplay challenges. They are the living embodiment of a world's entire history, the carriers of cosmic wisdom, and the bridges between what was and what might yet be. Whether dragons will continue to exist in future ages of the lands between remains to be seen. But their legacy, in the form of transformed humans, inherited magical traditions, environmental changes, and the countless stories of heroism and tragedy that their existence has generated, will endure long after the last dragon's roar fades from the world. The lore of Elden Ring's dragons is ultimately a love letter to the power of mythology itself, to the ways in which fantastic creatures can embody the deepest truths about existence, and to the enduring appeal of stories that blend the epic with the intimate, the cosmic with the personal, and the magical with the profoundly human. That concludes our comprehensive exploration of the lore of Elden Ring's dragons. From the primordial age of dragons through the civil wars that tore dragon civilization apart, from the friendships that bridged species to the corruption that claimed the noblest hearts, from the ancient practices of dragon communion to the modern struggles for survival in a changed world, we have traced the complete story of these magnificent creatures and their impact on the lands between. The dragons of Elden Ring represent some of the most complex and well-developed mythological beings in all of gaming, their stories interwoven with every aspect of the game's rich lore. Understanding their history provides crucial context for understanding the world itself, from its earliest origins to its current fractured state. I hope this deep dive into dragon lore has enhanced your appreciation for the incredible depth and complexity of From Software's world building. The Lands Between is a place where every creature, every item, every location has a story to tell, and the dragon stories are among the most epic and emotionally resonant of them all. May you find peaceful rest in the knowledge of these ancient tales, and may the dragons you encounter in your dreams inspire in you the same sense of wonder and respect that they have inspired in countless Tarnish before you. Sleep well, and let the thunder of distant wing beats and the crackle of ancient lightning carry you gently into slumber. The age of dragons may have passed, but their legacy remains eternal, woven into the very fabric of the Lands Between, waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to seek out their stories. And now, as we close this chapter, we honor them, the stone lords of yesterday, the flesh-bound survivors of today, and the transformed hybrids of tomorrow. They were dragons, they are dragons, and in memory and legend, they will always be dragons. Rest now, tarnished. The dragons have shared their secrets, and the night is deep. May your dreams be filled with the majesty of ancient wings and the wisdom of ages long past.